morning will see that I have promoted myself from being the irritating person who jumps up from the side, like Puck or somebody. I've promoted myself to being the chairperson, because with me I have two people who I'm tremendously pleased to have here this afternoon, because as well as being great creative artists and writers, they're also dear friends. And so this is a terrific event for me personally this afternoon, and I feel perfectly certain that it's going to be a lovely event for you as well. Those who were here this morning will remember that in our very first session there was nearly a sort of feeling of competition when Peter Wayne said, well, Robert Simper, marvellous man, written 46 books, marvellous man, written 46 books, and then Juliet Blackstone said, well, can I have my 12 children's books taken into consideration? and I have written, about 4 books about horses as well as wild books. But I have to say, if there was any feeling that there was going to be a competition, we have our supreme champion here this afternoon. Because if you look around on your seats or on the tables, you will find that Richard Woodman, I don't know how he's done it, I'm not sure he knows how he did it either, has written 76 books. and I have a small fragment of them on my shelves. And I have to tell you, they're not just, the adventures of a sailing dinghy or something. There's 5 volumes of the history of the Merchant Navy. There are a series. If you look around the walls as we have them now, you will find that dear Jane Russell, who helped me put these up, we had to have a little bit of difficulty, didn't we, Jane? Because we had to say, try not to have too many of Richard's books next to each other. So we've sort of done a sort of dot and carry one all the way around the walls. So I'm very delighted that Richard has been persuaded to come here this afternoon. It's natural because he's actually a very kind person. The very second time I properly met him, I'd taken Peter Duck into Harwich Harbour and we were off Halfpenny Pier, and I'd only just taken over Peter Duck, and she was looking rather smart because she just had some lovely yard work done on her topsides. And Richard came down and he took one look, and knowing how the water in Halfpenny Pier goes boom, 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 up and down all night, he rushed off to the chandlery and came back with 3 sturdy fenders. He said, you'll be needing these. So that was a great bit of kindness. He's probably forgotten, but I remain. We've still got the fenders. I remain very grateful.
They usually fall off. Yes.
No, very grateful for them. And the most recent piece of kindness he's done for Golden Duck is we've republished this lovely little book, which isn't actually going to be available. It's here today, but it won't probably be available till August. It's Maid Matelot. It's the memoir of a Wren Stoker by Roselle Raines. And Richard knew Lady Roselle. She was a yachtswoman around the East Coast, as well as having many other things. And so he's written us an appreciation in the back of this. So when you read that, it will tell you that Richard is not just a good friend who rushes around when people need fenders for their topsides. He is also somebody who can reflect on other people's lives and their qualities. What I think we want from him today, and it might be hard, but we're going to try and get it, we're going to try and get him to reflect a little bit on his seagoing career, which began when he was a teenager, and has scarcely stopped. He's now an elder brother of Trinity House. It's a fabulous story. I keep asking if I can write his biography, but I'm still working on this one. And reflect on what the sea has taught him in a sort of rather mechanical way. Richard is here this afternoon because the thing he did when he retired was go to the Arctic. Claudia, my dear friend Claudia, is here this afternoon because, as you've already heard, she's recently come back from Antarctica. So I think from Suffolk, the title of our session is Away from Suffolk by Sea. I know Richard is sort of technically Essex, but we're getting over that. Yeah. So, as Jane and Russie were saying to us this morning, if you've got a boat, you can go to the ends of the earth. So here we are, we're at the ends of the earth. Now, luckily, there isn't a productivity competition for artists, because otherwise I think I would have the supreme champion sitting on the other side of me, and that would be quite overwhelming. I'm always amazed by Claudia, because she always says yes to everything. And you know, one week she's producing a set of tiles, the next week she's producing a cartoon for Practical Boat Owner, and then she's sitting out in her kayak dashing off a little sketch, and then she's coming up with something rather spiritual and reflective. And I think I've been holding off hearing too much about her Antarctica experience, but I think that what it's perhaps, and we'll hear this, stimulated in you is an appreciate more of the spiritual, the environmental, it's not a cartoon for Practical Boat Owner, is it? No. So I think I'm just going to say, and I've said it rather too great a length, how happy I am to have these people here this afternoon. Now I'm going to sit down and let Claudia tell us about her Antarctica with a sketchbook or whatever it is, and then we'll try and get a little bit from Richard as to his insights and observations, and what I'm very much hoping that we'll get some questions and conversation coming from all of us, because we'll all have things we want to know, so bear that in mind. There will be space for asking things. Right, Claudia, off you go.
Thank you, Julia. Can you all hear me all right at the back?
Yes.
Excellent. Okay, oceans. I'm not a professional seafarer by any means. I haven't done a fraction of the mileage that Richard has done. But I'm kind of a bit of a fan of oceans. And I love arriving somewhere by sea where you get that slow approach and the slow landfall and the dot on the horizon. Lovely approaching Easter Island on the sail very, very slowly in the rain. And you get this little dot that grows into a bigger dot and then a bigger dot. And then it's a place you can step onto. And I love that slow approach. And I like oceans, and I'm kind of a bit of a fan. I've travelled all of them a little bit. And there used to be 5 oceans. And now there are 6. Because recently the Southern Ocean has been recognised officially as an ocean because of its unique importance in conservation and its contribution to the life of the planet. Before I went to Antarctica, I did a little bit of digging. I had 10 days in quarantine at a disused army barracks, which I'll gloss over. You really don't want to know how many chips I had to eat. But I did have time to do a bit of reading and a bit of research. And it turns out that the oceans absorb 90% of all our greenhouse gases. And not just that, the Southern Ocean, which is only a tiddler, 30% of the volume, that absorbs sort of about 3/4 of it all. So we owe everything to that wild wilderness, the other side of the globe. And the only time it hits the news is when yachtsmen turn upside down on it. And it's very rough and it's very windy. And I do prefer it to the North Sea, as some of you this morning will know, because it's a nicer colour for a start. It's rather lovely. Officially, the Southern Ocean begins at 60 degrees south. But to a sailor, it begins much further north than that. I was very lucky to be sailing into the Southern Ocean in 2019, and coming down from the Pacific, you notice the difference in the weather very quickly. And yachtsmen call the 40 degrees latitude the roaring 40s, and now I know why. The 50s are the furious 50s, and the 60s are the screaming 60s. And I think that applies to decades. I'm having the best fun of my life in my screaming 60s, and there's a bit more yet to do. So I was 63 when I did my Cape Horn voyage under sail, and I expected it to be a challenge, but it was more of a challenge. I was blown away by the beauty of the place. And in the North Sea, you don't tend to get an albatross hanging on your stern. Kind of manky seagulls, yes, but not albatrosses. As a marine artist, I have to draw the sea for a living. I illustrate for Classic Boat magazine and lots of other places. And one day, I really want to get the hang of drawing the sea. It really can. It's one of the things I would like to say I got it, but I don't think you ever can. And going to sea with a sketchbook is quite challenging. I'm going to show you some slides. It's most of these slides are about Antarctica, but I've also got a little bit about my sailing voyage, because that's where I started trying to draw the ocean. I went on that beautiful Dutch ship there, from Galapagos to Easter Island to Falkland via Cape Horn. The Dutch are brilliant sailors. I knew I'd be safe. And you're on the wheel and you're going down a big wave at 11 knots in 120 tons of boat, and you know that when the skipper walks past, you will be off your compass course. And the skipper walks past and goes, "Don't fuck it up!" But it was a brilliant ship to sail. I thoroughly recommend her. She's off to Antarctica this winter, and in my heart I would love to stow away. She's just on the Northwest Passage as well, which I think was the one place in Jane's map that there weren't any white lines of ship traffic. And so on my sailing trip, because I don't often pay to go sailing. Usually I'm very good at blagging rides on boats and ships. And this time this is something I really wanted to do, so I threw my savings at it, and I'm glad I did. But what my deal with myself was that I wouldn't take a camera. So I had to do it like the seafarers of old did it. If I wanted to record it, I had to draw it. That's how they travelled. That's how generations of sailors, sea captains always drew. All those beautiful charts and notes on charts. There's a beautiful kind of book about logbooks where they're all illustrated. Art wasn't something that artists did. It was something you did if you wanted to take notice of your surroundings. So this was my illustrated logbook. I didn't bring it, I don't know why, I just brought my Antarctic sketchbooks. But it's in the book called Sketchbook Sailor, which Jules is selling at the back there. And my task was to try and get that bloody sea, the right colour and the movement and the flow. And when you're on a sailing boat and everything's flying around and you've got your paint box wedged under the main sheet, there's my paint box, all in there, all the blues lined up on the top. And then they say they want to tack, so you have to kind of rescue everything before it goes flying. That's my excuse, but I did feel I made a bit of progress with trying to get that feeling of something. You have to rely on movement, memory. You have to look more intensely when you haven't got a camera in your hand. And I really recommend trying it. Just to see if you can. Your visual memory might be better than you think. We tend to take a camera and think, I won't look at it properly now, I'll take a photo and I can look at it later. And then you kind of don't. But every page of my sailing logbook, I look at it and I'm right back there. And even if it's not a good drawing, that process still works. And if you want to know how to draw, I can teach you. And I've written a book about it. Moving on. Come on. Thank you. Recently, I was very lucky to have gone to Antarctica. I got back in January. This was a really lucky break for me. I applied slightly on a whim to be artist in residence for Friends of Scott Polar Research Institute in Cambridge, because a friend had tipped me off that this was a thing. I didn't know it was a thing. I thought artists in residence were only for artists, and I'm not an artist, I'm an illustrator. I colour in and do functional art. But I applied and I got it. This was COVID time, and I think they wanted something different. So off I went. I'm very glad we didn't have Captain Cook's chart. This was drawn this is my copy of a chart by Joseph Gilbert, who was Captain Cook's sailing master. And he was the illustrator and chart maker on that second voyage, where Captain Cook got as far as just below 60 degrees and decided that there was absolutely nothing worth seeing there. Did I write down a quote? No, I didn't. But he said, there's nothing down here but sea and ice. If there is an Antarctica, and I doubt it, it's not going to be worth visiting anyway. He was deeply unimpressed. So that was his view in generations of sailors. If I haven't found it, it doesn't exist, and here be dragons, or in this case, penguins. So that fascinates me, because generally Antarctica was on the map because the Greeks decided that there ought to be a huge landmass down there to balance the landmass to the north. And they were right, it turned out. But Captain Cook didn't have much truck with that. But that's always fascinated me. This is the ship I was lucky enough to go down on. It's the Royal Navy's only icebreaker. And it's not a big ship, smaller and far less shiny than the David Attenborough, but beautiful little ship. And I was the only non-naval personnel on board, and I didn't have a clue what was going on. They're talking acronyms the whole time. It was just completely bewildering, but they treated me very well, and I ate a lot of chips. So this was our trip. I love maps. We went from the Falklands on that lovely big loop round by South Georgia, South Sandwich Islands, and then to the Antarctic Peninsula. There were lots of jobs the ship was doing. She was mainly surveying. There's a lot of places where the glaciers are melting and retreating, and the bays are opening up and have never been entered or surveyed. So we were cruising along the edge of glaciers, just surveying seabed, places that nobody had ever been. It's kind of a bit humbling. And also, because the charts down there are very thin anyway, the place was kind of, nobody knows who first went down there. It was kind of sealers and whalers territory, and they were quite cagey about their pilotage notes because they didn't want anybody else to get the best sealing or whaling grounds. So it's all a bit ambiguous, all the charts work down there. But for me it was a joy to spend so long at sea, the slow approach, getting used to the cold gradually. Just going to show you how I painted the sea. I need to clip this on I need my hands. I'm just going to clip this on there again. Yes. You warned me that would happen.
I feel I should sit next to you and hold the mic.
It's fine. I decided to have a go at painting the sea every day. And the way I did it, I've got all my sketchbooks here, so you're very welcome to have a look at them afterwards. I put this one in a concertina book so that it went like that. And every day I just painted the sea. And you might think it was all the same. Richard, do you want to take one in? And that's how many days we had at sea. So all I did was make sure that, I've got a page missing, that was an icy day and I haven't finished it. All I did was just make sure the horizon was in the right place. And then just stand on deck every day and just go a bit of blue. That's all you need to do really. Just throw a bit of blue at the page. Or a bit of grey. Well, it was all, I only used primary colours and I won't go on about it because it's not my lesson. But for me that was an interesting process, just that going further south and then gently coming back again. So, and it's just that thing about when you try and draw it, you kind of have to look in an intense way. And I know Richard's going to talk about what the sea does to your mind and how you can kind of, as a mariner, you have to look at it in a very specific way. But anyway, let me whiz through these as I get over time. That was my kind of kit for sketching on deck. Some days the deck was off limits because it was too rough. But the nice thing about being on the sailing boat was you have to be on deck anyway to do your watch, and so the waves are sloshing around your boots, and that's fine. But on that ship, I kept my feet dry. But it's always difficult painting a moving thing from a moving surface, so have everything really minimal, bulldog clips, and everything in one hand. And that's a water brush, if there are any artists here, where you put your water in the brush. Here it is. And you can just squeeze it through, so you don't need a water pot. Whether you're sketching on a boat, water pots are a menace. So occasionally, if the weather was nice, I was allowed onto the lower deck, and I found a thing, don't know what it was, to put my paint box on. The problem with that was worrying about it getting blown away, but I managed to hang on to it. But it's not always rough down there. Look, that was a nice day. Prettier colour than the North Sea. Much prettier colour. And bird life. I know the slides are too big for the screen, so imagine that albatross whizzing off there. Bottom left-hand corner is me trying to draw birds on the move because they keep twisting and turning. And a bird, when you draw it sideways on, it's just a line or a blob. That is a beautiful, beautiful albatross on the right. They're just 6-foot wingspan, they just take your breath away. Do you get those in the north, Richard? I think you do. They stray up there occasionally, I think.
Yeah, polar bears, penguins and albatross.
Yeah. But I try to draw from life as well as, and then later from photos. But you've got to try and get the movement of the thing as well, otherwise it might as well be a stuffed bird. You need that feeling of how it glides. That's one of the sea sketches that I just showed you. South Georgia, I'm going to go a little bit to South Georgia, and that was my first view of it with my camera. I did take the camera this time, I thought I'd better, because I didn't know how cold it was going to be for sketching. And I knew I'd be doing talks, so I took a camera. And this is about the difference between a camera and a sketchbook. And that was my 5:30 in the morning, excited first view of a glacier in South Georgia as we approached. That was my sketch of the same scene. And it's kind of less accurate, obviously, but for me, that's more personal, it was more expressed. When you're trying to sketch what you feel about what you're seeing as well as what you're seeing. And if you take a photo and somebody else takes a photo, they tend to be the same. But if you draw a sketch, even if you can't draw, you're doing something personal. Especially if you add words, because we're used to using words. We don't expect to be a brilliant writer to use words. You don't need to be a brilliant artist to use a pencil. It's allowed. And it's personal, it's your diary. And it's worth doing because the words and pictures, I think, go together, as they always have. Explorers' logbooks have their recollections in words and in pictures. And I think we've just got a bit lazy. We expect the camera to do it all. So, maybe if drawing isn't your thing, maybe let's get back to writing more about how our experiences are affecting us and touching us, even if they're local. Don't have to go there. I draw boats for a living, so this was a joy to find these old whaling ships on the beach in South Georgia, at a place where 175,000 whales were killed in 60 years in one whaling station alone at Grytviken. But the tide always turns, and now the South Georgia, if you're interested, look up the South Georgia Museum. The conservation work that's going on there is phenomenal. It's the most successful marine conservation area in the world. It's strictly protected. The rats have been eliminated from all the ships that were living there. The albatross are free to nest. The beach is so full of seals that humans are no longer allowed on the beach. And the seals are everywhere, and they're big. They're fur seals. They bite. They're quite scary creatures, and they have priority over humans on this island. So if they're in your way, you just can't go there. There's only about 10 people living there, and we were delivering their COVID vaccines, which was nice. And it wasn't that melancholy. There was this feeling of the derelict whaling station. But I won't go on too long because I'll get a look from Julian. But it was just a joy. I wanted to be there. They're big, these seals. That was a plan, but albino baby. It's just the cry of the seals round the bay and the stink of seal poo. It's just well worth experiencing. So yes, derelict ships. Some of those ships were quite small. Some of them came from the UK. It must have been a very, very lonely life. And don't forget, to the whalers, whales were just big fish. They had no idea that they were ever going to run out. And every single bit, it was the oil industry of its time. They were the plastics, they were the oil, they were everything. So in a way, plastic saved the whale. We're down on it now, but it was a big, wild, bleak industry. Then we went south and trying to draw icebergs with a blue pencil. And you you don't realise how big they are. Again, photos diminish things, they make them small, they kind of don't realise just what they feel like, and it's quite hard to capture that feeling, but they're big, and they've got this presence of cold. As I say, I've got my sketchbooks here, you're very welcome to, I did loads of other stuff, but I just brought a couple of sketchbooks that you're very welcome to look at. Life on board ship, which I hope Richard is going to go into a bit more, the detail of life on ship, where we kind of, the day-to-day routine goes on. You go to sea for wilderness and unusual and out the ordinary, but you still need to change your sheets, wash your knickers, and find a time when the laundrette isn't full with other people's stuff. So I was quite proud of myself. It was a really rough sea day. You can't read the text there, but I was feeling really seasick, so I get horribly seasick. And I managed to change my sheets and do my laundry. And that was huge. That was the only thing I achieved that day, as well as practicing different mixes with blue. But I was quite proud of myself for having achieved that on a really rough day in Britain Drake Passage. But down in Antarctica, sometimes it's just white. Lots of people laughed and said, "Oh, you'll come back with pages of white in your sketchbook." And sometimes you kind of felt that you would. It's very weird going through ice instead of through blue stuff. And there's just this crackle of the ice and kind of penguins running away. Life on the bridge. I love the fact that in that top sketch, there's so many screens in a modern ship, aren't there? And it's just all kind of every gadget known to man repeated on every screen. But you still need, right at the top there, if you can see, you still need a man with a pair of binoculars. You always need a man with a pair of bins looking out for the bigger icebergs that are going to be just too much for the ship. Meanwhile, the crew are having a good time taking selfies and taking photos. Quite warm down there sometimes. That's a photo of the man on the bridge. So I had free access to the ship and I could just sit up on the bridge and draw them. Trying not to get in the way. The ship now has a lady captain, by the way. Yeah, one of the first for an icebreaker. They're all so damn young. Everybody on that ship was young enough to be my son or daughter. Even the bloody captain was young enough to be my son or daughter. And he was desperately good looking. Anyway, that's life. But yeah, snowball fight on deck between the bridge wing and the foredeck. And trying to draw in the snow. I'm not going to go too much more into this because we want to get back to life on the sea, so I'll flick through. There's just a few of the challenges which I'm happy to talk about afterwards. And then hurrying back to a nice warm cabin to get on with it. And white on white. It's just this clarity of light, this feeling that you're suddenly, oh, I'm actually alive. I've never really felt this alive before. It's like watching life through, the rest of my life has been like looking through a slightly murky window and, oh, here I am. And I think the sea does that to us. I think we've all had places like that, the tops of mountains, just the moments of special clarity. Sometimes places do that to you. You have to have a penguin sketch. It's compulsory. Penguin chin-strap penguins, really cute. Difficult to draw a face on. But, and then Gen 2 penguins on the left there as well. And Deception Island, another old whaling station which began to fascinate me in the caldera of a live volcano. That whole chain of mountains is volcanic and this one still bubbles away. So I'm told you can swim there and it's warm, but I didn't put it to the test. Not in 22 degrees of wind chill, minus 22 wind chill. And that's pretty much it, I think. Surveying, taking bearings, doing just up and down, up and down. This was the South Sandwich Islands, just filling in the gaps in the chart. And the ship also carried a small survey ship called James Caird to do the little inshore bits of surveying. It's a place where, thankfully, people don't belong. And they're British, the islands. They're above the 60-degree parallel where the Antarctic Treaty starts. But you think, how can anybody own these places? We can't even land on them. The very idea of ownership just seems very conceited somehow. Yeah, they really are that shape. It's weird down in Antarctica. And I'm bringing us right back to the River Deben and a reminder that you could sail out of the entrance here from Felixstowe and you're on the same patch of water that will take you all the way to the ends of the earth. And the sea is really what this planet is all about. And that's my slideshow. Now let's just leave that that
Can you
side
hear me
up.
at the back? You can, right. But a very interesting talk by Claudia, and I just pick up on a couple of points she made. She's very fortunate. I really envy her two things. A, going to the Antarctic, and B, having double Cape Horn. I can only put 2 elbows on the table because I've only been through the 2 canals. I did a voyage which took me around the world before I was 18 years old and able to go legally into an English pub. I was particularly struck with two things. First of all, your ability to get out there and do it. And my wife's an artist, and when we were in the Arctic, not for as long as you were in the Antarctic, but she had problems with fresh water and doing her watercolours. And the captain of we were in a little Swedish expedition vessel. He saw what she was doing, she was struggling a bit, and he said, "Oh, water, use gin."
Yes, I did.
It surprised me for a Swede. I thought he would be too busy wanting to drink the gin himself. But anyway, and the other thing I was just going to touch on before I sort of shoot off onto my own memoirs, you mentioned the idea that officers in the Royal Navy and in the Merchant Navy to a lesser extent, particularly the East India Company in their day, had to develop artistic skills to record bits of coastline. One of the reasons was, in early navigation, you've all heard of the longitude problem. Latitude's very easy to find, and you know that some obscure port is on such and such a latitude. But finding the longitude is difficult, so it was quite an art, and part of the art and mystery of navigation, as Charles II called it, to know what your landfall was. So if you saw a bit of coast, you needed to know pretty damn quickly where it was. Was it north or south of your destination? And this was a problem right up in the Second World War. One or two of the very hastily trained American mariners who were put in command of Liberty ships or navigating Liberty ships didn't get it very right. There's a famous story of a Liberty ship going up the Bristol Channel, which she was sailing up the English Channel, which is a very old story. It goes back, you can link this with Admiral Cloudesley Chauvel, who drove his ship ashore on the Scilly Islands because he wasn't quite sure where he was. So, and one of the nice things about, I worked for Trinity House, as I'll explain in a minute, for many years, and one of the things that we did as young junior officers was to learn all the lighthouse landings around the coast. And they are mini exploration places because they're tricky. Getting a boat in and out alongside a lighthouse in some places extremely dangerous and quite tricky. And one of the things, apart from judging what time you had to go there, what height the tide was, whether you could get in and get out, how long you wanted to be there to discharge stores and people and all the rest of it, was lining up various transit marks, and you dropped stern anchors when this rock was in line with that rock, and or the tree on the second to the right of the church at Senham was in line with such and such a rock. You drop the stern anchor over and run in with it behind the motorboat. We were all encouraged to do these little sketches. So it's a tradition that went on for a long time. And I think I'm the last generation to practice that art in a very small way, because nowadays, of course, all reliefs and stores deliveries on these stations are by helicopter. Boat usage is cut down drastically these days from Trinity House vessels. So I am a dinosaur. I am a dinosaur. I went to sea in all senses of the word, because we don't have a very big merchant navy today, and very few boys, like the thousands in my generation, who went to sea as cadets or apprentices or whatever the company wanted to call them, either from school or from one of the training establishments. I went to sea directly from a school, but prior to that, I had been a very keen Sea Scout. So keen, in fact, that the year I should have been studying for my GCE exams, I was on a very big ex-German yacht built by the Nazis, one of the Windfall Kiel yachts. And we took her across to Norway, to Oslo and then Horten, and raced her to Ostend. That was in 1960. On our way from Southampton to Oslo, we stopped at Harwich, and that was the first time I had any connection with the East Coast rivers. So I have a fairly long history with the rivers, although it wasn't until much later in my career I came to live in this area and to acquire a boat and to sail and to love this particular area, particularly for its sailing. I went to sea out of economic necessity. I was 16, as I say, and I joined a company that worked out of Liverpool in cargo liners, sailing to the Far East mainly, Australia, but also to the United States, hence my round-the-world trip, which I did in 1963 to 4, or was it 2 to 3. So that's where I learned my craft. I did that for a 4-year apprenticeship, and then I came ashore and sat for my second mate certificate in London, and I passed and then went back with the Blue Funnel Line as it was, Alfred Holt and Company, and I became a junior officer, having my own watch. And but after about 2 years, I realised that the company was not particularly thriving. There were the prospects of promotion were poor. They were going to merge personnel with another of their subsidiary companies. I didn't particularly want to go to West Africa. I liked the Far East run. So I just, but I'd also met the young lady who became my wife, and I thought this was the swinging 60s. And all my colleagues on board ship, their marriages were all crashing, because no young lady in those days wanted a bloke to be away for 4 or 5 months, whatever. So I decided that I'd head off trouble at the pass, and I applied for a job with Trinity House. Having been here in the Nordwind as a young Sea Scout, I thought that might be quite a good job. And it looked interesting, so I applied, and they said, sorry mate, there's no vacancies, but we'll put you on a waiting list. So I thought, well, I've got to do something because I'm not earning any money. So I toddled off to Greenock in Scotland, and I joined the Ocean Weather Service, which meant I had to go to sea on some rather dreadful ex-Second World War corvettes, which were converted to weather ships. They were quite interesting little ships, and a bit of huge contrast with the very smart, very solid cargo liners that I had been used to. And I spent a winter in the North Atlantic, which was a great experience. I wouldn't say, comparing seafaring experience is always invidious. I don't think we got the seas that they have off Cape Horn, but we got some exceedingly high winds, and we got some exceedingly big seas nevertheless. And those bloody things roll on wet grass. And even when we were out there on station, keep sending in our weather reports and flying off balloons to check upper atmosphere winds, which we did regularly every 6 hours. We had to maintain station. There was a lot of navigation, even though we had some fairly primitive electronic aids in those days. No GPS, of course. But lots of lovely taking star sights and doing all that sort of thing, which I absolutely loved. And I did that for a winter, and on my last trip, I didn't know it was my last trip, but as I came ashore, I got home, and I found a letter saying, report Harwich. You'll be going to Great Yarmouth to join and relieve the second officer for 3 weeks or something like that. Anyway, I was only on the ship 10 days, and they said, no, you've got to go to Swansea. So I had a lovely old MG in those days, and I drove my old MG all the way to Swansea, and it managed to get there, and I became an official second officer, not on relief. I was appointed. I went for 3 weeks, and I stayed for 3 years. By the time I ended my 3 years, I was a married man. We bought our first house in Swansea. And the beauty of the Trinity House work was that for a sailor, I was never very interested in, when I was deep sea, I was never very interested in where we went. I was to some extent interested in the culture. I did try and absorb some of it. I tried also to avoid the dockside bars, which were only intent on fleecing you of your money and possibly implicating you in all sorts of horrors. So I was very content with going to sea in Trinity House vessels, because the British coast is fascinating. It's very busy. There's lots to do. It's very varied. Claudia said she didn't like the North Sea. The North Sea can be a terrible place. There's a very famous Dutch captain called Jan de Hartog, who wrote in one of his very good books, trouble on the North Sea is as bad as trouble anywhere. And I can vouch for that, having done some salvage work in the North Sea. And the sea is a demanding master. And it doesn't matter where you practice your craft as a seaman, and it doesn't really matter what sort of ship you're on, or yacht. And that beautiful ketch that you did your trip round the Hall on is just as interesting, as demanding as a very large vessel coming up the channel bound from Rotterdam with, lots of boxes or lots of oil or whatever. So all the qualities you need for being a good seaman, and certainly a good officer and in command, are an endless capacity for vigilance and for being engaged professionally all the time. And you can do that anywhere. So what the sea does to you is it draws out of you the best if you are intended for it, if I can put it like that. Not everybody is. Not everybody is. I loved it, and I loved it because in part I was getting a bit of a home life, and I wasn't going away from, my longest trip was 10 months. Well, you can't do that for very long. But locally here around these coasts, I thoroughly enjoyed it, looking after all the lighthouses, changing buoys, light vessels. It's a very, very involved job. It is a bit like painting the fourth bridge, but somebody has to do it, as they say. Trinity House had a long and august history. I've written about it. But it also offers you immense amount of variety, and it doesn't nail you down to what I found the most awful part of going deep sea was the cargo work in port. I did not enjoy that, but that was a personal thing. I didn't enjoy it very much, particularly as a very young man, 16, 17, 18-year-old. We were always sent down into the holds, no box boats in those days. All the cargo was in what are called open stows, so the local dockers or wharfies or coolies or whatever you want to call them were very adept at and very keen to get their hands on anything that was floggable, drinkable or marketable. And as a young cadet, I spent hours and hours and hours sitting down a filthy hold, just what we call cargo watching. I was a policeman. Right. I did have one interesting, I only ever caught 2 blokes broaching cargo, and the first one I reported to the third mate, who was off to the deck, and while I was standing in the 'tween deck, which is the hold is there, from the keel's there, hold is there, and the 'tween deck is a smaller space, and then the upper deck's here. I was speaking to him saying, I caught this bloke, blah, blah, blah. What are you going to do about it? Because this is what I was there for, I thought. And as I was saying this guy punched me in the face. I still got the scars, and I went backwards, open hold. I ended up the bottom of the hold. Fortunately for me, the steel tank top had been covered by 4 or 5 layers of bales of manila hemp, and I landed on them. That might sound quite cushy, but when you drop 30 feet onto bales of manila hemp, it's quite hard. And it was the only time the master of that ship showed any interest in my prospects. He thought I was dead. Somebody told him that Midshipman Woodman had just been thrown down the hold by one of the coolies on the ship. Anyway, that's by the way. But you mentioned that the sea is the road to anywhere. And you get this feeling when you're sailing, whether you're, particularly when I bought my 3rd cruising boat on the Deben at Waldringfield, and I can remember very cold October morning, I came down the river under motor. I didn't know the boat at all. I just took a bolter and taken her off the mooring, and I had a couple of friends with me, and we motored down. We were getting the sails off and trying to find what went where and what tide, and none of it really worked until I got my hands on the boat properly. But I remember an immense feeling of, not pride, but satisfaction that I could actually take this boat anywhere in the world I wanted to. Sadly, I didn't. But I got as far as the Baltic, and I got as far as the Western Channel, and I've done other offshore sailing with friends. So my furthest south was with a friend. I sailed down to Rio de Janeiro. So that's my furthest south. It isn't very far south, is it? No,
it's impressive.
My furthest north was about 80, just under 81 degrees north of Svalbard. And that was very exciting. But it was nothing. I was a passenger. I was paying for the privilege of doing it. I got involved with, in case you were wondering, much has been made of my 70-odd books, 3 of which I had to tell you were privately published for my own satisfaction, so I'm boasting slightly. But I got involved in writing largely because I had been made as a young cadet to keep a daily logbook. And of course those were the days where, before emails or anything, we had to write home to mum and dad. And if we were lucky, we had a girlfriend to write home to as well, you know, try and keep her on track. So I began to really enjoy the logbook writing. And as Claudia has said, when you write things down or paint them, you observe them much more closely. If you've got to write about something or you've got to paint it, you look much more closely. And pretty much the only thing I took away from my otherwise quite good grammar school was the art master, who taught us not just to see and look, but to observe. And that's very important when you go to sea, because you've got to have eyes all around you. You mentioned the binoculars. You can have a ship full of gizmos. And I had a very nasty experience with a junior officer when I was in command. You can have a ship full of gizmos with things telling you that they're going to pass so far away ahead of you, and you can plot on your radar, and it's all very, very clever and sophisticated. A lot of it's done for you manually now, done automatically now. In my day, I used to do a lot of it manually. But it still doesn't exclude using the Mark I navigation aid, a pair of eyes. And it's very, very important that when you go to sea, you observe, you look. And of course this starts to inform you, start to file this information away. I was also very keen on reading. I read copiously as a young man. We had these very, very good libraries on board, which were provided by the Marine Society, which was a charity founded in 1756. And it was an organisation that took boys, orphans and ragamuffins off the streets of London and turned them into sailors, sent them to sea in the merchant, what was then the Merchant Marine or the Royal Navy. And they continued to operate and combined with another organisation called the Seafarers Education Services, by which you could do O-levels, A-levels, even do a degree through the Seafarers Education Service, a wonderful institution. It's now rather wound down since the glory days of the Merchant Navy. But I was lucky enough to have access to these libraries, and they were very, very good. There was always a good mixture, about 100 books. There was always a smattering of reference books, so there's a dictionary, a good atlas, the sort of a thesaurus, that sort of thing. But then there was a smattering of novels, a smattering of biographies, a smattering of histories. So that was a pretty eclectic mix of stuff to read from. And I took books away myself anyway. My mother's always very good. She'd find something interesting for me to read. And all this fed into the idea that I might be able to write one day. And I did have quite a creative gene, I suppose. And I did paint and draw a bit, not very good. But because of the logbooks, I decided that I would try and write professionally. And I was very lucky. My first book was turned down, but the publisher to whom I had sent it sent me the reader's report, which was quite encouraging, and asked me if I'd written anything else, and I had, and I sent this off, and that started the ball rolling. I then wrote a series of 14 novels about one chap who went to sea in the American War of Independence and carried on through the Napoleonic War. And that sort of steamrolled on. I wrote a number of other novels, quite a few other novels, and then 1996-ish, my publisher said to me, "You always wanted to write history, Richard." I said, "Yes, but I mean, I'm not an academic." He said, "No, but you're a sailor, you've got experience." He said, "I want you to write, I'd like you to write the history of convoys to North Russia, Arctic convoys," which I did, and that led on to 2 other studies of Second World War convoy system, which have been, well, I think we say well regarded, well reviewed. So that's how I got into writing. It's been a wonderful experience for me because the marine world is rather constrained. You can quite easily know, particularly today when it's quite shrunk, quite small, you can pretty much know everybody at my age who's anybody. But going into publishing, it opened a whole new circle of friends and colleagues and what have you, and experiences, because people invite you to places and you go to talks and what have you. So I've been a very lucky man. And I'd be very happy to take questions in a minute, but I think I'm getting a sense that I've probably rabbited on for long enough.
No, Richard, it's been lovely, but as Claudia said, there's Julia in the look.
Which is great.
So I'd be very happy to take questions, and thank you very much for listening.
I'm not sure what to do now, because I think we should have questions, but then Claudia's got a song.
Only a little one.
Should we have a little song? And then let's have the questions. It's called Last Voyages, Claudia?
I like mixing words and pictures. And when you write words that sort of turn into a poem, you think, well, I'm not very good at poems, but if they've got a tune to them, then I can cope. So I wrote a song about every time I step ashore from a trip, I think, is that it? Was that the last time? When I came ashore from my Cape Horn voyage, I thought, that scratched the itch. That's the last time I'll ever go to sea. It doesn't scratch. The itch never scratches. That itch just keeps itching away. So then I went to Antarctica. When I came back, when we saw the Falklands in sight, I thought, is this it? Is this the last ocean voyage I'm ever going to make? And it sort of turned into a song. And then I thought, I'll do this song. And then a little imp on my shoulder says, "You're not allowed to do songs at the Felixstowe Book Festival." And I thought, I'm going to anyway. I'm going to take that off, or else it'll get in the way of my instrument. So this is the last voyage. It's only a couple of minutes, then we get back to the real business. Can you still hear me?
Yeah.
Let me sail once more where the albatross soar. Let me ride the wide ocean again. When I'm safe back in harbour and lines are made fast, I will pray that this voyage has not been my last. I've sailed where the trade winds blow warm in your face, and the night sky is peppered with lights, and the strip sea is straight with one hand on the wheel, and there's nothing but ocean in sight. Let me sail once more where the albatross soar. Let me ride the wide ocean again. When I'm safe back in harbour and lines I will pray that this voyage has not been my last. I have travelled far south where the oceans can freeze and the icy wind cuts like a knife, and the snow patrol flies over indigo seas, and there's nothing but ocean in sight. Give me just one more voyage, just one more ship, give me one more horizon to reach. Let me feel once more the salt wind on my face before I am left on the beach. Let me sail once more where the albatross soar. Let me ride the wide ocean again. When I'm safe back in harbour and lines are made fast, I will pray that this voyage has not been my last. Thank you for indulging me.
That was a tearjerker.
Sorry.
Oh my goodness. Well, now, does anybody have questions?
I broke the atmosphere.
No, it was terrific. It's like my favourite piece of writing, which is that little bit in Peter Duck,
yes,
when the old seaman is sitting on the bollard, that he just wants to go to sea one more time before it's too late. Before I take a question, I am just going to click the mood and say, please let's not forget that our next session is concerned with how to make these experiences more widely available to other people so they can have the chance of voyages. We live in a different world. I'm going to leave that because that's going to be our next session. We have got time for a couple of questions. Yes, let's have a question.
For Claudia, you were obviously quite prolific when you were down south.
Mm-hmm.
What does the Institute do with all your pictures?
It's up to me what I do with them. They will want a painting off me, and so will the Royal Navy. I will probably have an exhibition, but mainly it's up to me, as long as what I do reflects the work of the Institute. And so I told them I was going to do books and films and stuff rather than an exhibition. Because I don't really do finished paintings, but I will just keep on doing talks and produce the best book I can, and I'll give them a painting if I can actually get around to painting one. Thank you, Ian.
Any more questions? Yes.
Richard, as you will know, cadets these days, the four-year cadetship, spend 3 years of it at college and only 1 year at sea. And part of that time in their cadetship, they spend time in simulators, because this is considered to be equivalent to being on the bridge of a ship. What's your view on that?
Oh, what would you expect it to be? There were two, when I was an apprentice, we were rather grandly called midshipmen. I was challenged by a naval officer you call yourself a midshipman? Yes, I said I can, because that's what we were. But anyway, there was, even when I was at sea in the 60s, when I spent Euro sea, there were the two philosophies. You signed your indentures, and the shipping company agreed to train you up in the business of being a seaman, which didn't include navigation, which is not something you realise until you went up for your second mate's ticket, but actually they taught you very little. And you had to do an awful lot of swatting and cramming at a college before you actually submitted yourselves to the rigours of a Board of Trade examination. The company I was with believed firmly that none of their officers should be able to tell anybody, any sailor, give them an order that they hadn't carried out the task themselves. So we got all the dreadfully dirty jobs and, very practical seamanship. And, as a 16-year-old boy, I wasn't particularly robust. I was 9.5 stone at the time. And, wrestling with derrick wires and were 2.5 inches in circumference and what have you. Was quite rigorous. But other companies actually ran school ships where they had the cadets did have schooly time. They had classroom lectures. I think that the balance has to be between the two. I don't really favour, personally, the emphasis on too much classroom work. You've got to get out there. Simulators are great. Simulators can be fun because you can have an accident in the simulation and all go off your smoko and have a cup of coffee and think, oh, that was great, I just put a ship on the rocks at 20 knots. That was quite exciting. But, you know, you cannot beat hands-on, honest, practical experience on the bridge as a cadet, joining the officers, taking responsibility for the actions of the ship, doing your bit in the navigation of the ship. It's pretty easy nowadays, but you never know when these things are all going to crash, and you have to get that little ham bone out of the box and rattle your brains till you remember how to use it. So I think probably, like so many things, we've gone, the pendulum swung a bit far the other way. I'm a hands-on sailor in that respect, certainly for training. Right, thank you.
And I hate to say it, but we haven't got time for more formal questions now, because we have got in quarter of an hour, we have got the sort of sequel, if you like, which is you too can go to see how can we help young people today, or people with disadvantages today, to have anything like, even just the going down the deep end experience. That's what we need to consider at 3:30. So I think with so much to think of, I'd just like to thank Claudia and thank Richard for an absolutely terrific session. And I think they will be around for a little while, so please grab them and ask all the questions that I've stopped you from asking now. Thank you very much indeed.